Welcome to the Lemons and Pineapples podcast. I'm your host, Emma O'Brien, personal development coach, heart math practitioner, dog photographer, and entrepreneur. In this podcast, I share tools, strategies, and amazing guest interviews to help you improve your mindset and your well-being with a sprinkle of fun and probably some mention of dogs along the way. So without further ado, let's squeeze the day. Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 9 of the podcast. Today, I'm talking to Mark Phillips about addiction. Mark is a fellow Brit living in Darwin, Australia. He's a single dad, a radio show host, a podcaster, and a recovering gambling addict. Welcome, Mark. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
It's great to have you here. I'm really pleased that you've joined me to talk about something which I think a lot of people tend not to want to talk about, and that is addiction, and specifically for you, gambling addiction.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I would just like you to share a little bit about your story before we jump into our kind of conversation around this. I'm also keen to know how you ended up in Australia as a Brit living in another far-flung location for me in South Africa. I'd also love to know how you ended up in Oz.
Okay, so I'll give you a bit of a brief sort of background. So it was never my intention to settle in England. That's never what I wanted to do. I finished my apprenticeship in England age 21 and I went to live in New Zealand. I did a year there on a working holiday visa. Didn't really sort of settle there and I wasn't really feeling it, at that time. So I came back to England. I did a year's volunteer work in Namibia, which is, I know, quite close to where you are. Mm-hmm. I did that for a year. I always had sort of one foot out the door. I never really put down strong roots in England, and it was always the intention to move overseas. And I guess the GFC in the late 2000s was kind of the real catalyst that pushed me towards Australia. I just met and got engaged to my wife at the time, and I'd said to her, even when we started dating, I said, look, this is my intention. I'm not intending to settle in the UK. So if you're not on board with that sort of plan, then let's not bother getting serious or anything like that. But her parents had just moved to Florida. So she was kind of, up for the idea of moving and having a better life with me in Australia. So in 2010, we came to Australia. We were married in 2009. We got married in Florida. And we came to Australia in 2010. And the intention always was, and the thinking behind it was for work opportunities. Obviously, in England in the late 2000s, it wasn't that flash. Mm. And there were heaps and heaps of work opportunities for us both in Western Australia. I know you said at the top of there that I'm in Darwin, but I actually live in Perth. But when we met before, I was in Darwin when we were chatting. So I'm a bit of a globe-trotting jet set. I'm always in different places. And one of the most relevant things to my story is the reason I wanted to come to Western Australia is to get a job in what we call in Western Australia FIFO, fly in, fly out. So we fly up to a remote mine site for a period of time, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, sometimes 4 weeks, and then you come back home to Perth for a break. You have a week or 2 weeks off, and then you go back again. And it's very lucrative pay wise. It's roughly double the salary that I would get doing the same job locally in Perth. And that was always my intention to do that, and my wife was on board with me doing that. And so that was probably the main sort of relevant point to the chat. That's quite integral to the story, really. And so I started doing that. We were managing a backpackers hostel when we first came to Australia. That was an interesting few months.
I can imagine.
My good practice for parenthood.
Yeah.
I can say for free.
Parenting everybody else's badly behaved children who've just left the country for the first time. Yeah, gosh. My daughter has just started university, so I think we're on day 3 of Freshers Week. So I can, she's already been in hospital having her finger stitched back up after drunk drying up. So I can only imagine what managing a backpackers hostel must have been like for you.
it was okay. We were a good team. I think my wife at the time was sort of, commiserating with the girls, with their broken hearts and what was going on, and you know, being a mum to the boys when they're hungover, and and that
Yeah.
kind of thing. And I was
Yeah.
I was basically security. I'm not going to lie. Like that's what it was, and that's what it needed.
Yeah.
I had quite a few sort of moments where it was like, okay, yeah, but yeah, that was okay. And then
Mm.
we moved when we got our permanent residency granted in 2011. We moved into a rental, and then we looked to sort of settle down and buy a house and start a family and that kind of thing. And
Mm.
that's where Dexter comes into the story. Our son, he's just turned 11, and he was born in 2012, and I was working away 1 week on, 1 week off.
Yeah.
And again, I'll cut a very long story short. My ex-wife was, whoops, spoiler alert. My wife at the time was coerced into an unnecessary C-section, and it wasn't what we wanted. We were very pro natural birth, and it wasn't an ideal situation. But when you're told by a medical professional that you're putting your baby's life at risk by
Yeah.
not doing what they say,
Yeah.
it's you can't say no. You just
Yeah.
can't.
Yeah.
She was coerced into an unnecessary C-section. They left her traumatized, PTSD, anxiety, depression.
Mm.
Dexter had a very, how should we say, troubled start to life. We didn't. He
Mm.
was in the NICU for a few weeks, and he was a few weeks old before we were allowed to take him home. He
Mm.
survived. He thrived. Over the years, he's had many medical problems, and which are still ongoing. But you would never know it to look at him. And but during that time, um, that week that he was born, we moved out of our rental into our house. Um, we got the keys the day before he was born. I was made redundant from my week off job,
Mm.
and um, my wife was going through all this, and our son was going through all this, and mentally for us both, it was incredibly tough.
Mm.
Really, really, I'd say I don't think my life would have to take an incredibly bad turn for me to have a worse week than that. It was
Yeah.
it was absolutely horrendous,
Mm.
and I I could see that my wife was not coping mentally, and there were a lot of you know balls juggling in the air with moving into the house and our son and what was going to happen and surgeries he was having and is he going to survive? And at one point we were called to the NICU unit and said, you might want to spend the evening, the night with your son because we don't think he's gonna make it to the morning.
Mm.
And yeah, it was a really, really stressful week, and I didn't feel like I could crumble or
Yeah.
or or I had to be the man, the stoic,
Yes.
to just push through and do
Yes.
all the practical things that needed doing, move into the house, get the nursery ready. Do you know
Mm.
what I mean? Just do
Yeah.
all those things. I'm also worrying, financially, I'm under stress because
Yeah.
we haven't got any money coming in. My wife was
Mm.
on maternity payment, for I think it's about 6 months you get it for in Australia, but
Yeah.
it's not very much. It's not enough to live on.
Yeah.
Certainly not when you've just taken on a huge mortgage and you
Yes.
spent all your savings on new carpets, decorating the house, furniture, and that kind of thing. So it was a really, really stressful time, and I just went into that practical mode. But I managed to get another job.
Yeah.
Of Did casual work for a couple of years, which is incredibly stressful
Yes.
in the same sort of role, but it would be like a week contract, a 2 week
Yeah.
contract.
Yeah.
And there were times when I would get offered two or three contracts that would overlap, and I would have to pick one. I would always pick the longest one because it paid the most.
Mm.
And I'd literally get to the airport and see that my flight had been cancelled. And
Ugh.
sorry, we don't need you now, Mark.
Oh
That's
no.
the nature of the casual employee in Western
Mm.
Australia. It still goes
Mm.
on now. It's a
Mm.
lot better, but it still goes on. And so that was an incredibly stressful kind of sort of 18 months, really.
Yeah.
We were financially really struggling at that time. And I took out, unbeknownst to my wife at the time, so I didn't want to tell her, I took out a credit card and a loan just for, day-to-day expenses and, bills and nappies and, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I wasn't earning enough, and it just sort of smoothed the monthly sort of outgoings when my work was dried up, or I was getting told,
Yes.
sorry, we don't need you now, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And after about a year, I kept it from her. She found out that we'd had this, like, at that point it was probably, I don't know, up around the $20,000 mark
Gosh.
of credit card loan. And I'm not gonna lie, Emma. I'm not that gifted when it comes to financial management. It's not my strong point. That was her strong point, and I did what I thought was best
Yes.
at the time for
Yeah.
us as a family, but I know now that it wasn't. And when she found out, she didn't take it very well, and she said to me, "If you ever do anything like that again, we're finished."
Right.
And I was like, right, okay, all right. So then she took over the finances. I got a full-time job, then working 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, which paid a bit better. Obviously, it's regular. There's no more stress of, am I going to get a pay this week or not? It was a regular income, fixed salary. I'm still working away from home, right? So my wife is dealing with hospital appointments, doctor's appointments, Dexter, and everything that he's going through with his bowel problems and, all of those kinds of things. She's dealing with all that. And all I can think to myself is I just need to keep earning the money, just keep going away and earning the money, just keep bringing the money in. That's all you can do. That's what you need to do, because you need to keep putting food on the table, be the provider to a couple of mortgage payments. We weren't really sort of going to lose the house or anything, but I was in touch with the mortgage company and I knew the situation, but I'd missed a couple of mortgage payments and things weren't that great. And yeah, so I got that job and it sort of, it squared things away. It steadied the ship for a few years.
Yeah.
But the guilt that I felt over like how Dexter was and how I would leave her, I can't tell you, every 2 weeks, every month, like flying away and leaving them behind, knowing what she's going to be facing, and now I know she's struggling, was really, really difficult for me. I had a lot of guilt around that, and I knew I wasn't in a good place. I really knew I was not in a good place, but
Yeah.
I just had to keep pressing on. Felt if I just keep doing this, just keep, we'll get out of this and things will get better, and and things will go well.
It sounds to me, so listening to your story, there was almost this trigger stacking over the course of time. You moved to Australia, you had the kind of job insecurity, you'd moved into a new house, you had a new baby, the complications with the baby, your now ex-wife at the time struggling with mental health stuff, which I think a lot of new mums struggle with anyway, without having a baby who's in NICU, who's got health problems. There's a lot of anxiety going on. The whole time you're having to hold everything together and, like you've said, be the man and prop everything up. So there's nobody to prop you up. And then on top of all of your stuff going on, you've got these feelings of guilt happening because you've taken her away, the support system's not there, and you lose your job and everything else. I mean, there's just so much going on all at the same time, which is hellish it would be hellish for anybody. And amongst all of this, where did the gambling addiction start to play in? Because my hunch would be that it was an outlet for you to try and kind of blow off steam and to be able to gain some sort of control. Tell me more about kind of how that happened, but about what was going on and how that was playing out amongst all of the chaos that was in your life.
So the perfect storm, I guess, was brewing with me and the gambling. So I was working away from home, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. I would do 1 week of days, 1 week of nights. I was desperately unhappy in the marriage since Dexter was born. We'd lost that closeness. We were so wrapped up in being parents. We ended up pretty much feeling like housemates who were bringing up children together. That's how it felt. And I wasn't there half the time. There was a lack of intimacy for a long time. And that kind of, for me, that builds connection for me with a partner, and when that's not there, that starts to erode the foundation, I think. And so the when the hit comes, we weren't strong enough. Do you know what I mean? And so that was going on as well. I was unhappy. There was a lack of intimacy. We were, not really communicating that well. Dexter's things were ongoing. His health issues were ongoing. So I was still feeling bad about that. Every time I flew away, I felt guilty. I would be working night shift. Then obviously I'm a football fan. I'm a Tottenham supporter. So we would be able to, on quiet times during night shift, me and my work partner, my work wife, as we refer to each other. He's also English. He's from Manchester, and he was a big Man City fan. So we would watch football games together while we were at work. We'd have a little bet. It wasn't much at the time, and another friend of mine started what they call a punters club on the Sportsbet app, and you join as a group, and everybody pays in $10 a week. Everybody has a $10 bet, and then all the winnings go in a pot, and then at the end of the year or whenever it is you decide, you spend it on whatever you want. He asked me if I wanted to join, and I said yes, and that was really the start of it. $10 a week doesn't seem like a lot, fiver in pounds. But obviously that's the hook that draws you in. It makes you download the app. You add your credit card or debit card to the app. So I had the opportunity because I was away, working away on my own every evening, or I was at work with the opportunity to watch games, have a bet. I had the means where I had, a credit card with a $35,000 limit. I had, I was unhappy. I was looking for escapism. I was looking for, like you say, an outlet. I was looking to take some kind of what would feel like control, but ultimately with wisdom and hindsight, it's not. It's the opposite of control. It's out of control. And it started off with the Punters Club and $10 a week, and within a year, I was betting $1,000 on a game, and it got right out of yeah. I bet $1,000 on Fulham against, I think it was Sheffield United. I had a reason for it. It was the gambler's brain was telling me it was a good bet. And it won. I won like $3,000. But when you're betting $1,000 on a game, a $3,000 wins nothing. Do you know what I mean? And when your credit card's at 35,000 and you've got all this going on, trying to make payments, it becomes a problem. That's just you just about covered your minimum payment for the month then with that. So it gradually, and it got to the point where I started off betting on Premier League football, and then obviously living in Australia with the time zones the way they are, I started looking then like, right, okay, what game's kicking off next? Who's kicking off next? So the day would start with South America and American teams kicking off, and then it would move through the time zones, and then I'll be betting on the European games, I'll be betting on the Asian games, then I'll be betting on the Australian games, and it just became who's next, and it just took over my life. I wasn't, because of the debt that I was in, I just I couldn't think about anything else. At work, at home, with the kids, with my wife, it was just on my mind 24/7. I'd go to sleep thinking about it. I'd have anxiety or dreams about it.
Yeah.
I'd wake up thinking about it. It was just, and when I got to the point I stopped, the only reason I stopped is because the credit card got to its limit.
Yes.
And I had no further means.
Yes.
Without, using cash in the bank that my wife was aware of.
Yeah.
Obviously, she was aware we had this credit card, but she wasn't aware the level it was at. She thought there was, nothing on it.
Can I ask you, what need did the gambling fulfill for you?
Excitement, obsession. I guess it took my mind off of my problems, I think, as well.
Okay.
It took me away from what was going on in my life at home and what was going on at work. I wasn't having a great time at work either. I was trying to apply for promotions and I kept getting knocked back, and I hated the job. I hated working away from home. It was horrible, and it took me out of that mindset and into a sort of fantasy world, if you like, of of money winning and gambling. And
Yeah.
football and odds and, all that kind of world. So, yeah, I
Yeah.
think it took me away from that for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a like a literal self-soothing behavior in a life that was very lots of things out of control. Like you said, you felt unhappy, and I guess when you won, which it gives you the sense of a real sense of euphoria and that dopamine hit, which is,
Yeah.
I guess, essentially
Yeah.
what you're looking for with it. You've
Yeah.
talked about you stopped when the credit card hit its limit.
Yeah.
Was that the complete stopping point for you? I'm
Yeah.
interested to know, because I know you've been recovering for a few years now. Can you tell me a bit about the process of what was going through your head when you realized you had to stop, and what mindset shifts you had to make to stay stopped? Because I guess it would have been easy to go, I'm going to stop until I've paid enough back on the credit card that I can go again. So what was it that made you stop and then not do it again?
So what I got to the limit of the credit card. So I had no, so it took away the means then.
Yep.
I'd already kind of identified that I had a problem, and I'd already kind of, unbeknownst to myself, identified what some of my triggers were, and I was trying desperately to get off of that work crew and get a job with the same company somewhere else to take away the opportunity that I was having as well. But when that failed and I got to the end of the credit card, I was like, okay, now I've got no means, so I've just got to stop. Because what you try and do as a gambler, and it's the easiest trap for someone who's gambling to fall into, is you try and what gamblers call chasing. If you
Yeah.
try and gamble your way out of the problem, that's what I was trying
Oh,
to do. I was trying to win enough to pay back my losses. It never works. It never ever works. You
yep.
can never gamble your way out of the problem. So I sort of got to the limit of the credit card, and I was like, right, okay, now I've got to suck it up. And when that reality hit me, it really hit me mentally hard. I got to a point where I was suicidal, and I'd started having suicidal sort of ideologies around how I would do it and when I would do it and what it would look like. And it started off, I would just go to bed at night and just think, I hope I don't wake up in the morning. That's kind of how it started, and then it sort of developed from there into, very real, practical. I'm a planner, Emma. It's what I do for a job. It's who I am as a person. I'm a forward thinker. So
Yep.
even in this situation, I'm thinking about how best to do it to minimize the impact on my colleagues. Do you know what I mean? Because it would be
Yeah.
away when I'm away from work.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
it got to that point of drilling down to it that far and thinking about it. But I, when you work away from home in Western Australia, every company offers what they call an employee assistance provider, and they are counselors, psychologists, or whatever other mental health support you need. It's free of charge. There's a phone number. It's everywhere in the workplace, on fridges, toilet walls, doors, office walls, notice boards. It gets mentioned in meetings. It's everywhere. And so I think the critical point for me was deciding to make that phone call and reaching out to that employee assistance provider. I had a few counselling sessions with her. She begged me to tell my wife about the problem and share the problem, but I just couldn't. Because of, if you ever do this again, we're finished. And as a child of a divorced parents, and how it was for me, I was so scared of my wife finding out what I'd done and ending the
Mm,
marriage. I
mm.
went to the absolutely ridiculous lengths to keep it from her, to stop her finding out what I'd done. In the meantime, we had a credit card that she knew about that we were paying money off of. But because of the interest payments that I was having to make, I was having to draw money from those cards and sort of spread it around. You know
Yep.
what I mean? I was like robbing Peter to pay Paul,
Yeah.
and just, there was a very limited amount of money because my wages would come into our joint bank account. Everything was completely transparent in terms of cash. Credit
Mm.
cards, obviously, she wasn't aware of. So I would try and, as best I could, scramble to spread the money around to keep at least keep the minimum payments, but not knock down the principle. So what I ended up with after probably 2 years was $93,000 of credit card debt.
Blimey.
And some of that was like $35,000 of that was pure gambling debt. A lot of it was interest payments from the other cards that I
Yeah.
took money out of. Think I had a sort of such a fear of her finding out. Like I said, I would go to any length. I would do anything to stop her finding out because I didn't want to put the kids through a separation and a divorce and all of the stuff that goes along with that. I was just so scared of it. I stopped on April Fool's Day 2019. That was my first, and I used an app called the 100-Day Challenge, which had been recommended to me by the psychologist that I used for the employee assistance program. And that's it's just basically a forum. It's a support group where people who've come through it have done it. And the idea is if you can do 100 days,
yes,
you break the addiction.
Yes.
If you can do 100 days gambling free. Obviously, for everyone, it's different. Everyone's got different triggers and different situations. But I felt like if I could do that, then I had a couple of false starts at it during the month of March where I sort of I didn't have any credit card money to gamble with, but I'd take cash into the local betting shop or I'd use my debit card. But I knew that was never going to work, and the amount of cash that I had spare was very, very limited. So when you've been betting $1,000 on a football match, $10, you might as well not bother. Do you know what I mean? Because you get nothing out of it.
It's play money.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, there's nothing. There's no thrill. There's no buzz.
No.
I sort of I had seen the psychologist and I'd done the 100-day challenge and I did the 100 days. During that time, I had a couple of moments where I'd done a lot of work with the psychologist. She taught me a lot about the psychology of gambling.
Yes.
How gambling companies market themselves.
Yes.
What they tap into, brain chemistry, like you were saying, that dopamine hit when you get a win.
Yeah.
And how your brain cycle works of, you've had a win, that you get that dopamine hit, right? I want that again. How do I get that? Well, by gambling. And then when you have a loss and you're down and you feel like you want to build yourself up, how can I do that? I need a dopamine hit. I'll gamble, and it just
feeds itself. Right. I mean, I think that we could have a whole other conversation about the psychology behind it. I think it's fascinating. And I think it's so interesting that you have taken the time to understand what was going on with the addiction. Because I think sometimes when we have an understanding of why we do something, it's a lot easier to not do it and to find that kind of the dopamine hit in a healthier way somewhere else.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what happened with me. Like I felt like I needed to arm myself with knowledge, and to be fair, that psychologist, she saved me and she taught me a lot, and I took a lot away from those sessions in terms of understanding gambling, my personal triggers, what they were.
Yes,
and but it didn't. I felt like I had a good handle on the problem, but I still had this debt that I was hiding from my wife.
Yes.
But during those 100 days, I had a couple of moments where I felt like I was not even on the right track. I felt I've got this. I've sussed this. This is no problem for me now. So we're in the local casino. Me and my wife. We were at a gala ball that was put on by Heart Kids, which is an organisation that supports families and children with congenital heart disease, which is one of the things that our son was suffering from. And we do a lot of work with that charity. And we were attending their gala ball. And it was at the Grand Ballroom at the Crown Casino in Perth. And we'd finished the night, and I think either we were going for a drink in another bar or we had a room at the casino. I can't remember like which, but we were walking through the casino floor. And it occurred to me that she would think it was strange if I didn't want to stop and have a bet on a game of roulette or something like that, because she knows I like a bit of a punt.
Mm-hmm.
She obviously has got no idea the length, the size of the problem or the debt that I'm hiding from her, but she knows I like a bit of a gamble. And I'm in this paranoid state of mind where at all costs, she cannot find out. Whatever happens, she cannot find out what I've
Yes.
done and the situation I'm in. So I said to myself, well, mate, you better have 20 bucks on red at least. Do you know what I mean? So she doesn't think it's strange. Because if she does and she starts asking you,
Yeah. What are
she'll
you going
know.
to say?
She'll
Yeah.
know. Yeah. So, and then within a couple of seconds, I realized that is just the gambler's brain trying to trick me into going back. And the moment that I identified that way of thinking and looked at it objectively as sort of two parts of my brain, like the angel and the devil on the shoulder, the moment I identified that moment, I was like, okay. Oh, first of all, no, shut up. She won't think it's strange if you don't have $20 on roulette, and I don't want to hear from you again now because I know your game. I know what you're after.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it ain't gonna happen. And that was it.
Okay.
That was a real moment of. It signified to me a real sort of different way of looking at myself and my problem, and I felt like I had the tools then and the knowledge and the character to just for it not to be a problem for me anymore, to not gamble.
Yeah.
And that was, like I say, that'd been May 2019. So not quite 4.5 years now. And I'm still on the right track. I still haven't gambled. And I don't think I ever will. I just can't. It's a
Yeah.
very difficult thing to explain, but I just feel like a switch flicked. And it's
Yes.
just like, I can't do that now. I just
Yes.
can't. It's not able. Obviously I've got the means and I've got
Yes.
the opportunity, but I
Yes.
know I can't do it. It's
Yeah.
so self-destructive. I'm
Yes.
just, it's like, I just can't do it. I know I
No,
can't.
it's a very interesting thing. So my mum she would still refer to herself as an alcoholic. She's not had a drink for probably 37 years. But to this day, she will not have food with alcohol in. She will not use mouthwash with alcohol in. She won't even have anything to drink that like an alcohol-free wine or anything, because she says to me, Emma, once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. I do not want to even go near temptation anywhere, because if you are an addict, there's no middle ground with it. You either do it or you don't do it, because I think it's a slippery slope for I'll just have a flutter here, or I'll just have a little drink, and it takes you so. And I think you've summed it up perfectly with that. Is it just for an addict? You know the consequences if you were to start it again.
Exactly right.
And I think it takes an incredible strength of mind and of character to be able to do what you've done and just not do it. And what you talk about with the awareness of those thought patterns, because it's our thoughts that drive our behavior. And when we can get hold of those, it's transformative with life. And I think that's such a wonderful example you've shared of just being able to go, hang on a minute, what is going on here? No, this little voice that's looking for the dopamine hit doesn't get to rule the show anymore.
Exactly right. And I did kind of replace the gambling a little bit. It was another good strategy that I put in place was, obviously, as you can see in the background, I'm a big music fan, and I kind of started a side hustle because I needed to bring some cash in that wasn't in our joint bank account that my wife would know about. I needed to get a side hustle going. Obviously, she knew I was doing it, but I can manage what she knows about the deviousness, the lies that I told Emma to my wife were incredible, and shameful. But I again, it was to keep the family together. That's why I did it.
Yes.
And the shame of admitting a gambling problem of that magnitude, I just couldn't do it. And so I started buying and selling vinyl records, and I would post sponsored ads on Facebook, saying, cash paid for vinyl records. A lot of people have boxes of records in their loft or in their cellar or, in their shed or, just gathering dust around the house. So people would ring me and say, yeah, I've got a box of records, if you want to come and have a look. And vinyl records are quite, can be quite lucrative if you get, the right sort of record. So the buzz that I would get turning up at somebody's house with the anticipation of what I might find in that box and what I might be able to pay for it in terms of, profit, was kind of the new buzz, the new hit. It was kind of a methadone that I could kind of live with. And it's also, not only does it fill that, you know, gap in my sort of soul, it's a money maker as well. So it was bringing in money as well. So I can, keep at least on top of the interest payments that I'd accrued. So I did that for a couple of years, and I've stopped doing it now. But it kind of it replaced that buzz, and I don't think it's very difficult. Like any addiction, anyone will tell you, to go straight cold turkey is very, very hard. So I started the vinyl business as a kind of, substitute, if you like, for that. And it filled an obsession void, because I am one of those sort of obsessive people about music, and I do obsess about things. Whatever the new project is, I'm all over it. And it filled that void as well. It took up a lot of headspace, where it took me sometimes away from 24/7 debt, 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 debt. But yeah, so over those 2 years, I carried on doing the records and carried on lying to my wife and not being present as a employee, as a friend, as a parent, as a brother, as a son, as a husband. There was just so much in my head about the debt. I was on top of the gambling problem. I'd
Yeah.
solved that one, but the debt remained, and I was just hoping that I could get on top of it before she found out. But that wasn't the case,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
About 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, I came home from work, and my wife said to me, "I want to remortgage to release some equity to refurbish the two bathrooms." And I had to disclose the debt. And as she'd said, if you ever do anything like this again, we're finished. We were finished.
Yeah.
And that then sort of, again, identifying the way of thinking and the triggers, because I'd sat there for 2 years, just over, when that happened, and said to myself, okay, one of my big motivators for stopping was, okay, when this comes out, eventually, whether I've got all the debt, none of the debt, some of the debt, when it comes out, at least I can say, but I haven't gambled since X date. I'm
Yes.
2 years or 3 years or whenever it is. I'm on top of the problem, in terms of gambling goes. So that I felt like I was hoping that would count for something in terms of, continuing the marriage and everything else. But when I realised it didn't, and it wouldn't count for anything, my wife said to me, "You've lied to me so well and so convincingly for years. I don't believe anything you say." And that's fair enough. I couldn't argue with that. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? That's fair enough. I was
Yeah.
when your family staying together depends on your ability to deceive someone,
Yes.
you get very, very good at it. Honestly, very, very good.
I
I
can
was very
imagine.
skilled. I was very skilled in you know deceiving her and lying. I was a very good liar. Um, yeah, so I understand um why she felt that way, and totally get it. And if the shoe was on the other foot, I would have felt the same. So that was another time where I was like, okay, this is a potential trigger now, because I know this has counted for nothing. Um, I had to sort of check in with myself again, and I started seeing a psychologist again, because I just felt like I needed a little bit of extra support, because
Yep.
everything I'd kind of worked towards in terms of, sobriety and not gambling anymore, she didn't believe me.
Yeah.
She felt like, I was still gambling, and I was lying about it, and when I knew that, I was like, okay, this could be careful, mate, because this could trigger you again
Yes.
into spiraling down again. So you need to just keep an eye on yourself. So I did that, and again, it was a good way of identifying, thought process, because I was, well, at this point, very well on top of the problem of gambling. I had it sussed, but I just felt like I had to do that check-in and just say, come on, mate, go and see a psychologist. I did 6 more sessions, and that was a lot. Obviously, we talked a lot more around the breakup and, the marriage and as well as the gambling addiction as well. But yeah, I still haven't gambled, and he raised an interesting point to me. That guy, the second psychologist that I saw, he was a specialist in gambling addiction, and he was very good. And he asked me a question once, and I still don't know the answer. I've thought about it a lot, and that was over 2 years since he's asked me this question, and I still don't know the answer. He said to me, "Do you think that you were so unhappy in the marriage that you subconsciously gambled as a way of ending the marriage?"
That is
And
a powerful question.
it is, yeah. And I couldn't answer him at the time. Well, obviously at the time I went, no, 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 of course not. But obviously I went away and thought about it, and I couldn't talk to my wife about things. So
Yes.
was that maybe a way of doing it? I could never say to my wife, look, I'm not happy in this marriage and I want it to end. I couldn't do that to the kids. So was
Yes.
this a kind of subconscious way of torpedoing the marriage, without having to have that conversation, putting it on her to make her end the marriage rather than me be the one to, but so yeah, still an interesting question. I
Yeah.
still don't know the answer. I'm open to the possibility. But I've, like I say, I've thought about it a lot over the last couple of years, and I'd like to think not.
Yeah.
Everybody would like to think they do the right thing and be brave and have those difficult conversations, but we're all human beings, aren't we? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're all fallible, and we all sometimes like to take the easy way. So I'm not that.
I don't think that was the easy way that you took there, Mark.
But in terms of ending the marriage,
Yes. Yes.
that was a kind of a backdoor way of doing it. I think
Yeah.
that's what he was getting at. And yeah, so that's an interesting question that I'm still pondering, and I probably will ponder for the
Yeah.
rest of my
For
days. But
lots.
yeah,
Yeah.
good one. Yeah,
Here's a question for you.
okay.
Do you think if you have had the help and support of a psychologist when you were going through Dexter's birth, when you were going through the redundancy, when you were going through, like you've said, and I think this is so common for men, of having to be the man and be the strong one and not show your feelings and be there to hold everyone up. Do you think in that point in time, if you had have seen a psychologist and had the support to talk through what was going on, had an outlet to be able to be vulnerable, to be able to really talk through your feelings, do you think you would have avoided the gambling kind of downward slide that you went on?
Categorically, yes.
Yeah.
100%. 100%.
Mm.
It did so much for me. I remember thinking at the time, like, why didn't I do this 2, 3, 4 years ago? Like, I really, hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? Do you know what I mean?
Always.
But yeah,
Always. Hindsight's
I remember
2020.
I remember in the second or third session it was I had with the initial psychologist, the EAP. I remember thinking, like, I remember the first session we had was just me basically telling the story of Dexter and his birth and everything else, and it was an hour-long session. It went for about an hour and 10 minutes, and I was crying for probably 45 minutes of that. It was just a massive outpouring of all this built-up anxiety and emotion, and and I was, after that session, I was like, you probably let a little bit too much come out there, mate. You probably should have, that box should not have been that full. You should have let some of that out a long time ago. Do you know what I mean? And I didn't. And yeah, but like I say, it was just that bloke mentality of, I've got to do the bloke thing here and just keep going, head down, arse up, keep working, keep bringing the money in. And it's not that I wasn't sympathetic to my wife and what she was going through. I really was, and I've tried to be understanding and help and support her as much as I possibly could. sound like I'm just going away and ignoring her and earning the money, and that's all I think I need to do. It's not. I was emotionally, I felt like, as much as I possibly could, trying to support her as well,
Yes.
whilst at the same time trying to deal with my own
Yes.
sort of issues.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think probably that would have been good, but it was never. I mean, it was never talked about. It was never mentioned or offered to me because I hid it, so no one knew. No one knew
No,
what I was going through. Just like it would
no.
not have been. It would have been on me.
But I think also people forget that when there is a traumatic birth, a baby that's not well, like Dexter was, people sometimes forget about dad, because I think that the mother is the one who goes through the birthing process, which is traumatic, and I think people forget about the guys, and that actually it's your baby as well. You've also been going through this whole scenario, and I think it's a gap in the system, to be honest.
Mm.
And we're not, and I think especially being, and I can say this because I'm also British, being British, we have this, we're not encouraged as a society to talk about our feelings. I mean, I think it's quite impressive. We've got two British people on a podcast talking about feelings. Let's congratulate ourselves for a minute, because it's that whole British stiff upper lip thing, don't talk about it, sweep it under the carpet, pull yourself together, put on the big boy pants, be the man.
Yeah.
And, look at the consequences of that for you.
Yeah, no, it was, one of the things that I sort of work on a lot now as a parent is making sure that my kids always feel like whatever the problems are, they can talk about. Do you know what I mean? Whatever it is, always talk to me, or their mum. I know for some reason, I don't know why, they feel, my daughter particularly, feels a lot more comfortable talking to my wife about, problems and things. That's absolutely fine. Doesn't have to be me. I'm just trying to, give them that kind of mindset of, if it's a teacher, do you know what I mean, or an auntie, or your mum, or whoever it is, speak up if you're having a problem. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And I always try and instill that in the kids because, obviously I don't use myself as an example because they're only 11 and 8, so they would never understand. But, as adults, that's, again, I try and take away. I had this conversation this morning. I played golf this morning with a really good old friend of mine. And we were talking, I told him I was coming on this podcast and, what we were going to be talking about. And he's obviously fully aware of my story now. And he said to me, but is gambling, do you look at gambling as a bad thing now? Because look at where your life is now because of gambling. Like, I've got a new partner, I've got a new job. I've got so much more going on. My life has improved in so many ways since I separated from my ex-wife. He said to me, do you look at gambling as a bad thing? Because if it weren't for gambling, you wouldn't be where you are now. And I was like, good question. I don't know. I probably do still look at it as a bad thing in the general sense of how negative it is for other people. But for me personally, all right, I've got some debt and everything else, but personally, I feel I'm in such a happier place now because the marriage ended, and it was hard. Don't get me wrong; probably
been there.
Year,
I know. Divorce
the first
is
year,
horrible.
It's 2 years just over since we separated, and I am a lot happier. My obviously major concern was the kids,
yes,
and how it would affect them, and it will always be my first consideration whenever I'm making any kind of decision, life decisions or anything like that. And they've come through it. I mean, it's such a people say our kids are so resilient and blah blah blah, and it's a cliche. But cliche, one of the best sayings I've ever heard is cliches are cliches for a reason, because they're true, right? It is true. Kids are resilient. They are flexible. And I think taking away the lessons that I learned from my own parents' divorce, and I'm not going to lie to you, Emma, there was a lot of bad examples of bad parenting during that time.
Yeah.
I can take it forward now and go, right, okay, don't do that. Don't make that mistake. Make sure you do this. Make sure you do that. And the biggest buzz I ever get in life is taking a negative and getting something positive out of it. For me, that's that's just the best thing you can do. And the gambling and the end of the marriage and everything else and the debt is by far the biggest negative I've ever come across and, experienced in my life. So to come out of it, with a new job, with a new, healthy, loving, incredible relationship, to have a better relationship with my kids, to doing the radio show and the podcast and everything else is just, I'm so fulfilled now. And but I get the buzz now from, people coming up to me and saying, love that track you played on the radio the other night, or people emailing the show and saying, love that song, really enjoyed that podcast. And, almost every band that I talk to say to me, I think your podcast format is brilliant. It's amazing. It's so good, so different, better than most interviews that we get asked to do and blah, blah, blah. So that's my new buzz. That's I get that now. I get that fulfillment. And what's critical about that, as opposed to the records, is there's no financial gain element to that.
Yes.
It's another step removed from the gambling. So I've over the years gradually kind of moved myself further and further away from that gambling buzz. I'm so sort of fulfilled now. And when Gareth asked me that question earlier, I did have to think on it and think, well, yeah, for me, gambling has probably, turned my life around for the better. I'd never be doing a radio show or a podcast if I was still married and working away from home and, all the rest of it. But I've got a job in Perth City now. I'm earning more money than I was before. It's helping me with the debts, and child support and, and all the rest of it. So, yeah, things have turned out for the best. It's been a character building few years. I've learned a lot about myself. But I've just, I know now I won't ever lie down. I'll never be beaten. I'll always look to improve and be better and be a better dad and be a better employee, be a better podcaster. Do you know what I mean? I'm all about that now. I'm all about the improving and being better. And, I've probably got another maybe 18 months, 2 years, and I'll be debt free. The future's bright.
Brilliant. And it brings to mind a great quote I saw it graffitied somewhere, and it was, sometimes our darkest hours can be our brightest. And I think it's what my big takeaway from our conversation is that you have been able to take something that fundamentally was a core shaking life change and say, all right, this happened. It wasn't really great at the time, but it has been the catalyst for me getting my life to a place that I'm happy. And I think that's amazing, really, because it's an amazing ability. And you've talked again, what I really admire is this ability to take something negative that's happened and find the positive in it. And I think that is really how we overcome difficult things in life, is to be able to go, what's the learning here for me, and how do I pick up, move on, and not get kind of caught up in all the past stuff. So this has been really inspiring for me to listen to. I know for my podcast listeners, it's going to be a real inspirational episode as well. So Mark, I just want to say thank you very, very much for sharing so vulnerably and honestly with me and everybody who's been listening. And I've really, really enjoyed this conversation with you today. So thank you.
Thanks, Emma.
Likewise.
I've got one more.
Very much.
I've got one more quote for you. I'll leave you with this one.
Yeah.
The road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom.
I love that. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. All right, folks.
Worries.
Thanks, Mark. And thank you, everybody, for listening to today's episode. We'll see you in the next one. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you've enjoyed it, please share with your friends and be sure to leave me a 5-star rating and review, especially if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. To find out more about my one-on-one coaching, please visit my website, which is emmaobriencoach.com. And remember, folks, when life gives you lemons, you can always choose another fruit. See you next time.